I'm Ryan Grimm. Thank you for joining us here on Drop Site News, regular Tuesday morning live stream. I'm going to be joined this morning by my colleagues Jeremy Scahill and Murtaza Hussain. Later in the program, we're going to be joined also by John Elmer of Electric Intifada, who you may know as one of the kind of foremost experts around the world on kind of resistance military techniques and technology. We're going to talk with him about the complex ambush that took place in Gaza just before the meeting that took place between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. Talk about what that means about the military confrontation that remains ongoing inside the Gaza Strip. We're going to also talk with Jeremy about the latest on the ceasefire negotiations. We'll begin by talking about the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump, which unsurprisingly evolved into press conference as they let in cameras and reporters into the room, and they had a wide-ranging exchange with the press. We're also going to talk about a report from Middle East Eye that suggests that China is now rearming Iran after the 12-day war and sending anti-aircraft battalions. We'll discuss whether or not we believe this reporting, and if so, what it means for the regional balance of power. We'll also talk about Tucker Carlson's interview with the Iranian president, as well as strikes on multiple civilian facilities throughout Yemen, which took place again right before the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump, and which themselves came after or around the same time the Houthis struck a tanker moving through, upping the conflict in the Red Sea there. So let me welcome now Murtaza and Jeremy. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Ryan.
So John will be here at 10:30 a.m. So we have a lot to get through before he joins. But I wanted to start with Netanyahu and Trump. I don't know if this is dark comedic relief to start out, but as some may have seen, Netanyahu began by nominating Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Let me play a little bit of this and get your reaction to that. And I'm figuring out these controls. Here we go. Let me make sure my DMs are not up. Okay, there we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well deserved. And you should get it.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know. Wow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful. Thank you very much, Bibi.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you. It's a great honor.
Coming from you in particular, I couldn't tell if that was Trump sarcasm. Maz, you had mentioned, didn't the Pakistanis also nominate Trump?
Yeah, Pakistan nominated Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize for what they said was his work in mediating the India-Pakistan war, which took place earlier this year. I think that these are people who know how to stroke his ego, and they're aware of his vanity and so forth. And Netanyahu obviously knows how Washington operates very well. He knows that Trump for a very long time. And the Pakistanis also kind of know how these things work a little bit too. So, I think it's funny in the, it was kind of darkly humorous given the context, but the way that there was like an audible response from Trump when Netanyahu gave him the envelope and told him that he's being nominated and so forth, clearly wants a Nobel Peace Prize. It's kind of just, I thought the Nobel Peace Prize had become sort of a joke since Kissinger won it, but it would probably add a new twist to it to give someone in the midst of helping facilitate a genocide actively at that moment the Nobel Peace Prize. But I think it's clearly just adding on to the corruption and the personalistic way that these guys deal with each other.
Yeah, Jeremy, anything to add to that before we play some more from this lunch from hell?
I mean, let's remember that Netanyahu is a international fugitive of justice, and I think that for Netanyahu to come and sit down with Trump. And Netanyahu and also Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, he said over the weekend, look, Netanyahu's been 3 times to visit this president in this short span of time. No other foreign leaders have had that honor, is how he characterized it, as evidence of the closeness of the relationship. But to have a man who has an international arrest warrant for him out, who is trying to convince the world that he's fighting a war in the interest of Western civilization, while Donald Trump on a domestic level is engaged in a widespread campaign targeting immigrants, is trying to criminalize speech about that's critical of Israel, and is shattering many of the so-called norms that had been established through global power elite consensus, the sort of rules-based order. And there's a very serious, legitimate critique to have of what that rules-based order looked like. I don't mean that was some, paradise of international law or fairness, but to have him with his arrest warrant looming over him, where his defense minister has announced that they are going to try to shove Palestinians by force into a concentration camp. And he used the term concentration, talking about this zone that they want to create on the rubble of Rafah in the south of Gaza. They're using Nazi terminology to describe the Nazi tactics that they're doing. It's out all in the open right now. So to say Trump should have the Nobel Peace Prize, on the one hand, it's grotesque. On the other hand, Henry Kissinger has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, one of the most unrepentant war criminals in modern history. So, I think in a way it's a fitting kickoff to whatever we're going to see come out of the next couple of days. And what is going to be decided now is basically whatever ultimatum they're going to issue to Hamas.
And he gets into
Iran and etc.
Right. Yeah, and he gets into a lot of this lunch. So let me play a little bit more of it. Pull this up here.
Going along very well. We just left each other, and it was not a pleasant period of a few days. It was longer than a few days, but this was not a pleasant period of time. And we were at the end. 14 missiles were shot, and every single missile was shot out of the air. It was pretty amazing. That was sort of the end. And they told us they were coming.
So he was asked here about the negotiations between between Hamas and Israel, and then notice he pivots very quickly to Iran here.
And where they were and what time they were coming. And they said, if you'd like to have a different time, we'll do that. And that's respect when they do that. I appreciated that they did that. There was no surprise. We got the soldiers out of the base in Intifada in this case, but they knew they were coming. 14 missiles were coming. 1 o'clock, they said, would you like to make it later? They said, no, let them come at 1 o'clock. And at 1 o'clock, everybody was, as you know, over 5,000 people left the base. And we had 3 gunners and 3 assistants. And out of the 14 that we shot, all 14 were knocked out. And that was the end. That was about it. And we had a rough time, but sometimes you need a rough time in order to get. I think things are going to be really settled down a lot in the Middle East, and they respect us, and they respect Israel. They respect a lot of things that took place. Nobody's ever seen equipment like what we sent over to knock out those sites. But when those sites were knocked out, that was the end.
Do you think there can be a 2-state solution there?
So, and we can go to this next question in a second, where he asks Netanyahu about the 2-state solution. But I felt like this was kind of interesting. They asked him about the talks between Hamas and Israel, and he pivots not just to Iran, but then he pivots to how Iran was so friendly in their response to them and told them, we're going to send 14 strikes. Here are the exact kind of strikes we're going to send. We're going to send them at 1 o'clock. Does 1 o'clock work for you? If 1 o'clock doesn't work, we have some windows later in the day. And Trump said, no, 1 o'clock is fine for the attack. And they got everybody off the various bases, and now they're very friendly. What is there anything to read in to his response there to move away from Gaza into Iran?
Doing this Trump Kremlinology has been so infuriating for like the last however long it's been. So it's hard to know what he means by what he's saying. You could take different meanings into it. He'd always try to portray a positive spin of his talks with Iran, I would say. He always says that it's on the verge of something very good happening. We're going to make a deal and so forth. He was saying that pretty much up to the point that the war started as well, too. It's how much veracity that has and so forth, like, it's kind of hard to say. I would say in the case of this attack, clearly was performative. There was a symbolic performative attack after the attack that the U.S. did against Iran's nuclear sites. They weren't trying to inflict casualties on the U.S. But the thing is that Iran's military forces are actually much more developed to attack bases in the Persian Gulf area, to attack the Gulf Arab states, to attack U.S. positions there. They're not actually developed very extensively to fight Israel. They're mainly focused on fighting in that region and shutting down shipping in the Strait of Hormuz and so forth. So if there was a serious war, they could actually just pretty much destroy the Gulf Arab states. They could destroy all the military bases in this area. They have very good anti-ship missiles. So it's not that, it actually is important that there was a performative sort of attack and not a real attack. Were there to be an uncontrolled escalation and the U.S. bases were populated and they chose to fight the Iranians there, it's very, very likely there would be casualties suffered by the U.S. and the damage to the Gulf Arab states would be catastrophic and maybe irrecoverable damage which takes place to the UAE and Saudi Arabia and so forth from that conflict. So I don't think he's wrong when he's saying that they choreographed it. It's just that the next stage is unclear because the Iranians are probably not done retaliating. The retaliation is much more likely to take place in the form of ramping up their nuclear program, which has been delayed but by no means destroyed by the attacks.
And let me play this Netanyahu response to the two-state solution question.
I don't know. I asked Bibi that question. You have the greatest man in the world to answer that age-old question, two-state. Go ahead. You give him your honest answer.
I think Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten us. And that means that certain powers, like overall security, will always remain in our hands. Now, that is a fact. And no one in Israel will agree to anything else because we don't commit suicide. We want life, we cherish life for ourselves, for our neighbors. And I think we can work out a peace between us and the entire Middle East with President Trump's leadership. And by working together, I think we can establish a very, very broad peace that will include all our neighbors.
So Netanyahu says we cherish life, we love life for ourselves. He kind of adds as an afterthought for ourselves and for our neighbors. He throughout this press briefing, he says we will never relinquish security control over the Palestinians. Jeremy, anything jump out at you about?
Well, I mean, one of the terms that Hamas is trying to get changed in this ceasefire framework, and we could talk more in detail about this, in a bit, but just it hasn't gotten much attention at all. I mean, most people are focused on the top line, bigger picture issues, wanting Trump to give clearer guarantees that he will force Israel to hold its fire beyond 60 days, beyond an initial truce, so that there can be negotiations for a permanent end to the war. The second one is the issue of aid, and that's the one that's the major focus right now of the Palestinian negotiators. They don't want the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to continue to murder Palestinians as they try to get meager rations, or to have the Israeli forces murder them for them. And then the third has to do with Israeli withdrawal positions. The Israelis, in the draft that Trump put forward and said this is the last proposal or the final proposal, we're trying to restart discussions on what the maps would look like, where Israeli troops would redeploy or would withdraw to. And Hamas is saying, no, we want the maps that we spent months negotiating that led to the January agreement. So those are the three big things that everyone is focusing on right now. But they also said that they want the Rafah border to be reopened. Remember, this was the only gateway that Palestinians in Gaza had to a world beyond Israel's control. The rest of the Gaza Strip is entirely surrounded by Israel and its occupation military bases. And so what Hamas put into their revised draft was that they want that border to be reopened, and for injured people, sick people, and trade also to be able to have a free flow between Egypt and Gaza. Now, of course, Netanyahu very much doesn't want that, and he portrays it as a smuggling route for weapons. But the reality is that one of the main reasons why many Palestinians who have been injured in Israeli attacks have died is because Israel has decimated the health system in Gaza. And so to even just get evacuated, to get out of Gaza is almost impossible for anyone in Gaza right now. So when we see what the current map looks like of Israeli forced displacement, it's, people have compared it to, a dystopic game show where Palestinian, more than 80% of Gaza now is either occupied by Israel or is under an Israeli exclusion zone where Palestinians have told that they can no longer live. And so they've been corralling them by force, issuing sometimes just minutes before strikes happen, these evacuation orders telling people that they have to move west. And so if you look at that map now, they're literally pushing people to the sea. And, you have hundreds of thousands of people that have gathered in Al-Mawasi, for instance, which is a huge section of the Western Gaza Strip filled with sand dunes. And you have makeshift refugee camps set up at Mawasi. What the plan announced by Israel Katz, the Israeli defense minister, says is that they want to take an initial 600,000 Palestinians and cram them into this concentration camp that they want to expedite the construction of in Rafah itself. And one of the things I was told by sources close to the Palestinian negotiators is that at some point in the past 2 weeks, I think it was around 2 weeks ago, Egyptian mediators re-entered the scene. Mostly it had been Qatar since March when Israel blew up the original ceasefire deal. And the Egyptians sat down with Hamas negotiators and they were pushing on them or testing the waters with them the idea that Israel could keep its forces entrenched in what's called the Philadelphia corridor, which is the route that cuts off Rafah and the border from the rest of the Gaza Strip. And what Netanyahu and others have said in recent days is that they not only want to hold the Philadelphia corridor, but then they want to move a bit north and continue to occupy what the Israelis call the Morag access or the Morag corridor. So that essentially would be just like a sliver of the southern Gaza Strip. And that is the exact location where Israel wants to build this concentration camp to force the Palestinians into. So initially, I was told that Hamas was saying, look, if we get other things in this deal, such as a strong guarantee from Trump that they won't resume the genocide, and withdrawal of all the other Israeli forces and unrestricted aid coming into Gaza, we'd be able to discuss a longer timeline for the withdrawal from Rafah. And remember, Egypt is the border country. Egypt has a complicated relationship with Hamas. So, Qatar's opinion on this matters very little compared to Egypt's, because for Egypt, it's also a bilateral issue with Israel. But the point I'm getting at is that not only have the Israelis said for many, many months that they won't leave the Philadelphia corridor, and this relates to your question about Netanyahu saying our security, Netanyahu has defined it in those terms, that allowing Palestinians access to the outside world is perceived as a threat. That's the way he's portraying it. But the final stage of this, which I think really needs to be re-emphasized over and over again, is that Netanyahu keeps saying that the agenda, which he calls Trump's plan, the agenda remains the forced removal, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza. So it's not just that they want to cram them into a concentration camp. It's that they want to cram them into a concentration camp and then kill as many people as they can who are not in the concentration camp. But in the meantime, try to find a way to forcibly deport those Palestinians by claiming that it's voluntary migration, but to deport them elsewhere and say so long. So the war of annihilation continues. The agenda of genocide is explicitly stated to the point where they're openly using Nazi phrases to describe the plan that they intend to implement. And they're saying that they intend to do the construction on this thing during the 60-day ceasefire. So, it's and one last thing, Ryan, on this, and we reported this a few days ago, in the Israeli media, there was a report by a well-connected political journalist citing sources from the political echelon which our colleague in Israel says refers almost entirely and exclusively to leaks from Netanyahu, stating that Netanyahu was told that Trump would give him a secret side letter, regardless of what the terms are of any ceasefire agreement signed, that states that he can resume the war if Hamas refuses to demilitarize the Gaza Strip or to exile its leaders. And those aren't even issues that exist in the term sheet right now that was circulated by the United States and the Qatari mediators. So, the Palestinians are in a situation right now where you have an international fugitive from justice meeting with the most powerful man in the world in Washington, D.C., while he and his defense minister are saying some of the most genocidal things they've said since the beginning of the war. They're openly saying that they intend to have this agreement, regardless of what it says, be temporary so that they can continue their agenda of totally ethnically cleansing Gaza and taking the territory as an Israeli property.
Yeah, and Trump and Netanyahu, they kind of weave in and out of, Iran, and then the depopulation of Gaza, and they move back to other things, including, Mamdani and whether or not he'll be arrested. And I want to get to that in 1 second, but I'm going to play some more of that clip. But so if you're Hamas now and you're in these negotiations and your objective is to prevent the creation of this concentration camp that, Israel Katz has said out loud, like the goal here is to produce what do you call it, a humanitarian zone? I think came up with some new
humanitarian cities,
humanitarian cities where Palestinians cannot leave. Another word for that is a prison, and there'd be no access to the outside world. And so that's the vision. And if Hamas is trying to prevent that vision from becoming a reality, what is the calculation in these ceasefire talks? Do you accept a ceasefire so that you can forestall it from happening, or do you have to reject the ceasefire because the ceasefire is going to lead to this humanitarian city? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe nobody knows.
I mean, they're under.
How are they thinking this through?
I mean, the past couple of days, I've talked to people that are directly in the negotiations, and I've mentioned this before, but Hamas leadership right now is under unprecedented pressure from Palestinians in Gaza. And, while, I think in some, Palestinians are not a monolith. I think people have differing views on Hamas and October 7th and the wisdom of it, et cetera. But, I think that much of the pressure that they're feeling is not, hostility toward them. I think it's desperation born of the fact that the entire population of Gaza is being slowly murdered, strangled to death. And so, I think the answer to this question has multiple layers to it. I think on a basic level, everyone in Gaza wants any deal in sight right now. They need it to stop. Their children are dying. They're dying from starvation and malnutrition. They're dying from being burned alive in tents when the Israelis bomb them. They're being murdered as they go to try to get tiny, meager rations of food. And so on one level, I think a lot of Palestinians, and I hear this from Palestinians in Gaza every day, they just want any deal right now. And I think that the hope is if it stops, then we can build momentum to try to make it stick. From the other perspective, though, Hamas, as the last elected governing authority, not just of Gaza, but actually all of Palestine, Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated by Israel in Tehran last summer, was meant to be the prime minister of Palestine, not of Gaza. But as the legitimate government body, and also as a Islamic resistance movement, and as Palestinians, first and foremost, I think that people can say whatever they want about Hamas officials, but I've met extensively with them and spoken with them. I think they legitimately are concerned that if they sign a deal that amounts to a surrender of the right of armed resistance by demilitarizing the Gaza Strip, or authorizes with the signature of Khalil al-Hayya, the top official doing these negotiations, in a open-ended Israeli occupation, that it effectively is surrendering the cause of Palestinian liberation. So, on a technical level, this deal would result in half of the living Israeli captives that are held by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad being released to Israel. Roughly half of the bodies of dead Israelis that remain in Gaza being returned to Israel. And so I think that part of it is they look at it and say, we realize we're going to lose quite a bit of our leverage, because the only cards, if you will, that the Palestinian resistance hold right now against Israel is that they hold these captives. So they're going to be giving up, if they sign a short-term deal, roughly half of what they have as a value in the eyes of Israel. And they're saying it's not nothing. We still would have 10 captives, and we still would have some leverage in negotiations. But Netanyahu may not actually care at the end of the day at all about the fate of the captives if he feels like he can just go in for the final blow that would wipe out Gaza as a Palestinian land. I don't think most Palestinians believe that's going to happen. Look, the Qassam brigades and Soraya al-Quds, and we're going to talk about this with John Elmer. Some of their most successful single operation strikes against Israeli forces have taken place over the past week or so. And, I don't think that's an accident. And, later I'm going to share with you an internal analysis when John's on the show that was shared with me that's been circulated among the resistance about revealing attempts by Israel to install spy devices throughout the Gaza Strip during the last ceasefire, and how the Qassam brigades and Soraya al-Quds discovered the way that they were doing surveillance and have used it against Israel. I think that's the one consistent, is that Palestinians have never surrendered. And so, Hamas is in a horrible position right now. And I think that, they've put a lot of weight on this idea of Trump saying it publicly, because think from their perspective, what else do you do? Their people want this to stop. And I think now they're hearing very clearly, it doesn't matter right now. Leave it for another day. Struggle will continue. Just get it to stop right now.
Right. All right. Before John comes on, let's roll through a little bit more of this Netanyahu briefing.
So what is the basis of the talks going forward? Is it to cap future nuclear activities, missiles, terror support, economic-based opportunities?
It's really a good question, because if you remember when it was done, I sort of said, what's the purpose of talking? It's been knocked out completely. But they've requested a meeting, and I'm going to go to a meeting, and if we can put something down on paper, that would be fine. That'll be good. I think they gained a lot of respect for us. I think they gained a lot of respect for Israel also. But they would like to meet, and we're going to have a meeting. Steve, when is that meeting going to be? Do you want to say? Very quickly, in the next week or so. So we'll see what happens. I think it'd be nice to memorialize it, put it down, but because of the incredible result of that attack, if you want to call it an attack, I didn't think it was necessary to have it in writing. I think we spoke. I mean, that speaks much louder than writing, but I can also understand why they'd want it. And they've been very nice. They've been very respectful. And it began by them telling us about 14 they had to do. You know what 14 represents, right? Do you know what 14 represents, right? You know that, right? The number of bombs dropped. So it was representative. We got them all. Yeah, please, behind you, please. No, you.
So this is the Prime Minister. A lot of the next mayor of New York City tore on the right. So the local critic of Israel, I know yourself, and said he would arrest you if you came to New York City if he was mayor. Is that something you take seriously? Are you concerned about that? Do you have a response to that?
No, I'm not concerned about that.
I'll get him out.
Look, there's enough craziness in the world, but I guess it never ends. I mean, you have this is folly, and it's it's silly in many ways because it's just not serious. But what is serious is the question I was asked before. After October 7th, people said Palestinians had Hamas state in Gaza, and look what they did with it. They didn't build it up. They built down into bunkers, into terror tunnels, after which they massacred our people, raped our women, beheaded our men, invaded our cities and our towns and our kibbutzim, and did horrendous massacres, the kind of which we didn't see since World War II and the Nazis, the Holocaust. So people aren't likely to say, let's just give them another state and it'll be a platform to destroy Israel. We'll work out a peace with our Palestinian neighbors, those who don't want to destroy us, and we'll work out a peace in which our security, the sovereign power of security, always remains in our hands. Now people say it's not a complete state, it's not a state, it's not that. We don't care. We vowed never again is now. It's not gonna happen again.
So we'll see you in New York next year?
Oh, well, look, I'm gonna come there with the President Trump, and we'll see how do you know who the mayor will be? I don't know that. Do we know that?
He's going to be very fine, and who knows? We don't know who the mayor's going to be yet. But this is a communist. He's not a socialist. He's a communist. And he said some really bad things about Jewish people. And he said some really bad things about a lot of people. And I think he's going through a little bit of a honeymoon right now, but he might make it. But, it all comes through the White House. He needs the money through the White House. He needs a lot. He's going to behave. He'll behave. He better behave. Otherwise, he's going to have big problems. But it's a philosophy that this country is not ready.
So obviously a lot of nonsense in there. He has not actually said anything terrible about Jewish people.
But also, why is it playing at like triple speed?
Oh, that's how I listen. I figure people can keep up.
You're subjecting the rest of us to this.
Yes.
Okay, it's bad enough to listen to it at regular speed, but okay.
I think it's worse to listen to it at regular speed. It makes the suffering go longer. These guys are, and people should listen to me at sped up too. I'm very deliberate in how I'm
keep your children off your settings.
Yes. So there was an interesting moment towards the end of that where he says, Netanyahu says, "Well, I'm going to go to New York with him." Which it seems like he wants a confrontation. Like he wants to go to New York with Trump and kind of dare the NYPD to do something with the Secret Service around. There was also the moment where Trump likes to play the alpha with Netanyahu around, even though in this relationship, it seems like Netanyahu is the actual alpha. And he was ribbing him a little bit there, saying, well, I'll get Bibi out. So he's kind of joking and foreseeing a scenario in which Mamdani actually does arrest him and lock him up. And then Trump goes in and gets him out. But just a remarkable situation where at least it's being discussed that his travel in the United States might be constricted.
Yeah, he's going to imagine like the Entebbe raid to free Netanyahu from the NYPD or something. But
which actually,
I think
wasn't Netanyahu's brother died in that raid, right?
Yeah, he was killed in that raid. I think that actually these comments about Mamdani and so forth, they actually are kind of serious in a way because I think they do find it intolerable that someone like that could be mayor of New York City. I think they would try to do whatever they can to avoid that or to constrain his ability to govern in
That's
office.
a good point. Netanyahu seemed in denial, or maybe he's going to be correct, but he was like, are we sure? Like Netanyahu feels like he can still stop this.
Well, I think they will take extreme steps to stop it if they can, and if they can't stop it, they'll do things after the fact to make the city ungovernable under his tenure and so forth. I think they expect serious retaliation. And the fact is being discussed between the official of a foreign government and the U.S. president, and they're acting there on the same side against a putative American official. It's quite a revealing moment, actually. And I think that, he's taken a very principled stand, Mamdani, on the subject, and they will retaliate. They will do something about this. And I think Netanyahu pretending not to know who he is, pretending all this so forth, that indicative of steps they're planning to take to perhaps preempt him from becoming mayor when the election does happen.
And Cuomo, relevant to this conversation, is literally his attorney at the, in his fugitive status. Like he's helping to represent him in these international war crimes.
But also, just one point to that. I mean, I'm not a political journalist in this sense, but I follow it like everyone else. I mean, the stance of many top Democrats on this also aids and abets the kind of Trump stance. You had David Patterson, the former governor of New York, issuing a statement last night or this morning that basically said, Mamdani is problematic and Democrats need to unite and come together and unite around a candidate that can win. And, Crystal Ball pointed out on Twitter, that's what a primary is for.
Yeah.
And he won the primary. But, I think part of the reason that we don't talk much about the Democrats in the context of discussions on Gaza anymore is because they're just down with the program. They're not doing anything. There are a handful that occasionally try to do something, and it's minimal. But we need to be clear here also that part of the reason Donald Trump is president, and it's one of the main reasons that Donald Trump is president, because Joe Biden was a genocidal ghoul for his entire 50-year political career. He facilitated the worst Israeli war crimes. He will go down in history, if it's written properly and accurately, as the great facilitator of Israel's colonial apartheid genocidal project. And Kamala Harris, when she became the nominee, that moment when she said, I wouldn't change anything, it was over. So whether it's on, the Gaza war, where it becomes Trump's, Trump then allows Israel to break the ceasefire. He gives Netanyahu now 3 months to just scorched earth mass murder Palestinians. Democrats say nothing about it. Remember AOC, Kamala's working tirelessly around the clock. No, tirelessly around the clock wouldn't mean signing up with CAA and trying to cash in on your political position. It would mean principle is principle. And if they want this war over, they have something critical to say, they should be up in arms about it. It's the premier issue of our day, this genocide. And the attacks on Mamdani from the Democratic establishment, or the whisper campaign against him, or the shouting campaign against him, it's all part of the same picture. The Democrats are a huge part of the problem. They want to talk about Trump. We can talk about Trump until the cows come home. We can talk about his murderous foreign policy right now. But because Trump is what he is, doesn't somehow excuse the Democrats. And I'm sorry, it has to be said, it doesn't mean that the Democrats are not the chief enablers of Trump and his policies, because they are. That's our political reality right now in the United States. There isn't an opposition party. There is an opposition party because they're both part of the same party when it comes down to core issues. That's the fact.
Can't even keep their own family members. I thought people would appreciate this. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, who is Hakeem Jeffries' brother, and I've actually spoken with him before. He's a leftist. He's a professor at Ohio State University of African American and U.S. history. Here's Prem posting his tweet here. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, yes, sir. Keep doing your thing. New York City needs you and wants you, from one Kwame to another, because Mamdani's middle name is also Kwame. He very rarely, his brother very, very rarely takes any position that could be newsworthy in contradiction to his brother out of kind of a familial loyalty. But even for him, it's getting too much. Hakeem Jeffries represents New York. Mamdani dominated in Jeffries' district, and Jeffries is still out there saying that Mamdani's got work to do until he wins over Democrats or some such. Just to make your point, we have a few minutes, Maz, before John joins. I wanted to get your reaction to this Middle East Eye report, both your sense of whether or not how much stock we should put into it, but also the news itself. According to Middle East Eye, China is now replenishing Iranian surface-to-air missile stocks in the wake of the 12-day war, and is taking oil in exchange for these weapons. Iran, perhaps in a strategic error, had for decades been getting most of its military equipment from Russia. How much stock should we put in this report, and what would be the significance if it's true?
I did see the report. I saw that it was sourced to anonymous Arab officials with no specific, more clarification. So it's a very vague sort of claim. I think that sometimes these claims are a bit hit and miss. And I did see, as we're talking, an Iranian journalist I know said that the Iranian sources that denied to him these claims that they'd taken these missiles deliveries from China. I think generally speaking, the Iranians obviously going to try to rebuild their deterrence after what happened in the 12-day war. And I'm not sure if building air defenses or the other things I've seen about taking possession of Chinese aircraft and so forth is really the best way to do it. To do this, it's not simple as buying some air defenses and putting them up in a few areas, and then you deter the Israeli military from striking you from the air. You'd have to actually build a very, very vast network of air defenses around the whole country. You'll equip with sensors and radars, and they need to be networked. What that means is a system in Western Iran, if it sees an Israeli aircraft, someone in central Iran will also have the same information. It's a very, very laborious and time-consuming, expensive process. A lot of this discussion came because of the India-Pakistan war. People were saying, well, the Chinese weapons seem to perform quite well, but it's very difficult to build an air defense system or an air force from scratch. And I was looking at the statistics. The Iranians need to probably buy 300 to 400 aircraft, competitive fighter aircraft, to be able to have some level of air deterrence over their territory. And even then, the Israelis have F-35s, they have very advanced American equipment. They don't have a budget that constrains them really in any sense. So you would really not be playing to the Israeli strengths as opposed to Iran's own strengths. I think what's more likely is that the Iranians, and probably with Chinese support, with bartering agreements they can do with oil and so forth, they'll probably try to ramp up their ballistic missile stocks, and they'll try to improve their strike capacities as opposed to trying to deter the Israeli Air Force, which is very, very difficult, takes a long time. The reason that Israel had the upper hand over the Arab nationalist countries in the last century in their conflicts was due to U.S. support, but also because of the fact that the Soviet weapons that they were getting were inferior quality to what the Israelis were getting from the U.S. So in the coming years, I think it's a very important thing, and we've seen that legal complaints and moral complaints about genocide have not stopped the Israeli government and not deterred the U.S. from going to the most extreme levels of inhumanity and violence against the Palestinians. One thing that could actually stop the situation, could change, is if in the place of Soviet weapons last century, Chinese weapons actually proved to be more effective. They're willing to sell them to the Egyptians and the Iranians and whoever else. If that's the case, then you could actually deter and stop these things. So even though I don't think this report necessarily is correct, I'll just wait for more information. I do believe that the Chinese weapons sales to Iran, other countries in the region, are happening, are going to continue happening, are going to ramp up now after we saw the effects in the India-Pakistan conflict. And that could actually, in the long term, be a deterrent. I just don't think that right now the air defenses that Iran is set to be getting from China are likely to be efficacious, or even if this report is true, which I'm not totally sure about.
Well, John Elmer is going to join us any second. As he does, related to your point about, would be these strikes on Yemen. So yesterday, Israel struck Port of Hodeidah, the Ras Issa fuel port, and also apparently a power plant that powered flour mills and other like food production facilities. I think I saw you making the comment somewhere that suggests a real weakness in some ways in Israel's ability to stop Houthi missile fire. That instead of being able to target Houthi military infrastructure, they're just going after civilian infrastructure.
We wrote about this at Drop Site a few months ago, and we interviewed Houthi officials. Effectively, the Houthis have gotten pretty good at air defense, and maybe it's not enough to shoot down F-35, but they reportedly came pretty close with the American F-35, and they shot down dozens of drones and so forth. It's actually quite hazardous to fly into their territory, and the Israelis are extremely casualty averse. If they lost even one plane, it would be catastrophic from their perspective. So in lieu of doing that, they're targeting civilian infrastructure. It's called counter-value targeting, you could say, as opposed to counter-force targeting. You can't stop the missiles, so let's blow up a food processing factory or a port or a power plant, which is more accessible on the coast. It's not directly under the Houthis' air defense umbrella. So I think that shows actually a weakness. And the missile strikes, we saw footage of it. One of the missiles impacted. And what this shows is that Houthis can still fire missiles after all these many, many months of U.S. and Israeli attacks. And Israeli missile defenses are getting weaker. They're actually exhausting. We know it's in public reporting. The U.S. cannot supply missiles to Ukraine, Israel, Southeast Asia, and then also maintain its own requirements as well, too. So I think that contrary to the perception that they try to portray that they have unlimited endurance to fight, they have total domination and so forth, there's serious shortcomings and weaknesses. Without U.S. constantly plugging the gaps, it would be even more manifest. But I think that Israel's military is very much built for sprints. It's not built for marathons. It's not built for wars of attrition that the Iranians are used to fighting, and the Houthis are also willing to fight now. And we're seeing that manifesting right now. And these strikes that the Israelis carried out were not, in my opinion, evidence of them being 10 feet tall, and nor were their operations in Iran during this recent conflict.
All right. Well, John Elmer is with us now. John's a journalist who specializes in kind of military strategy and tactics, and particularly among resistance organizations. John, we're really excited to have you on our stream. We've all watched yours over at Electronic Intifada over the years, so it's exciting to have you here.
Well, thanks a lot for having me.
So Jeremy has some news that he wanted to break as well, and then get your response to.
Yeah, I want to.
Yeah.
I mean, First of all, John, I've been watching your reports throughout the course of this genocide, and I think of you as the moral sort of opposite of the generals on CNN who are on the boards of the weapons companies being used, because for people who aren't familiar with the electronic Intifada stream, it's definitely must-watch TV throughout all of these wars, and John, I'm sure a lot of people watching now also watch Electronic Intifada stream, but if you don't, you should check it out. They almost always have a feature with John Keyes laying out what attacks have taken place from Soraya al-Quds or Qassam brigades, and it's not just in Gaza; it's also in other countries as well. When Lebanon was being attacked, and the Hezbollah second front had been open, and as well as Iran. But it's something you literally do not see anywhere else. And so I think what John is doing is a real public service. So I'm really excited that you're here with us. But inside baseball, I think you'll find this interesting. Some days ago, an internal assessment was shared with me that was circulated among armed resistance groups on the ground in Gaza. And I didn't do anything with it at the time, but then either yesterday or the day before, Al Jazeera Arabic reported, based on what they call the Hamas security official, a series of events, counter-espionage events that had taken place in Gaza. The resistance had discovered Israeli quadcopters, secret cameras that had been planted. They also found tracking devices powered by a chip, and described the way that the Israelis were able to keep the battery life of their surveillance gear operating. We could talk about some of the specifics, but I want to just read part of this internally circulated description of how they discovered this. I think, John, you're going to find it fascinating if you didn't already see this. But basically, it describes how the ceasefire agreement in January went into effect on the 19th, and that 2 months later, on March 18th, the Israelis resumed the genocidal war. And now I'm going to read directly from an English translation of this. Before the truce took effect and the Israeli forces withdrew from the Netzarim axis and other sites, Israel planted tens of thousands of tiny cameras and eavesdropping devices, which were professionally camouflaged and difficult to detect. During the truce, 25 Israeli prisoners were released. The occupation interrogated them and discussed in detail everything that had happened to them since the day they were captured. Netanyahu's plan required gathering information from the released prisoners in addition to the information they received by the second from cameras and eavesdropping devices, along with satellite imagery. This information was then used to determine the resistance's method of protecting the prisoners, their mechanism and method of movement through the tunnels, and other necessary and unnecessary details. As the saying goes in interrogation, quote, every piece of information, no matter how small, is important to the investigator, even if it isn't important to you, close quote. When Netanyahu believed he had a full grasp of the locations of the remaining prisoners and the pattern with which the resistance was confronting him, he decided to resume the war under the illusion that he would free the prisoners, eliminate the resistance, and end the Gaza problem within half a month, as promised to Trump in Europe. But the shock was that Netanyahu and his government were subjected to the greatest deception and strategic misinformation in history. Initially, due to the difficulty of finding and dismantling cameras and eavesdropping devices, the resistance decided to use them to mislead the Israeli army and pass on misleading information. Thus, the resistance eliminated these terrifying espionage methods, emptied them of their content, and even used them in some locations to its own advantage. Another important point is that the resistance dealt with the prisoners professionally from day one, manipulating them and implanting misleading information in their minds, knowing that Israel would one day extract this information and build upon it. Consequently, the resistance succeeded in using the prisoners to pass on contradictory and incorrect information that thwarted Netanyahu's plans and placed him in a difficult internal and external situation. So that was from the internally circulated description of this, but some of the specifics that Al Jazeera broke down in the last couple of days. They found multi-mission quadcopter drones, planted the eavesdropping and recording devices for espionage and military purposes. One of the seized devices broadcasts and records video and was camouflaged among the rubble of buildings in a vital area. To preserve the battery life, the enemy avoids filming the cameras and only captures images using motion detection. One of the cameras that we seized documented the moment a girl was killed while attempting to cross from southern Gaza to northern Gaza. A booby-trapped eavesdropping device camouflaged as a worn-out plastic container was dismantled near a shelter in Gaza City. Resistance engineers succeeded in neutralizing and dismantling the device, determining its mechanism of operation, and uncovering the purpose of its planting. It goes on and on, but one that's interesting that may have been connected to the assassination, perhaps, of Mohammed Sinwar. A spying device was planted inside a concrete block in the courtyard of a hospital in southern Gaza Strip to collect citizens' conversations. In any case, John, very interesting, and we don't get this level of detail, but interesting assessments about sort of counter-espionage and some of the tactics that were used. So I wanted to get your sort of read on this, and then we can talk about this attack last night that we understand killed 5 Israeli occupation soldiers and wounded many others.
Yeah, well, I think that for one thing to say is that those prisoner exchanges, the handovers, those are extremely dangerous for the resistance. The logistics of handing over those prisoners and the way that they did it in those ceremonies really, it upset the Israelis, but it was really important for the resistance to handle those in a way that didn't give away information, critical information. Those exchanges are very dangerous. Even the negotiations are dangerous because when you're looking for top-level approval for releasing certain prisoners or accepting certain conditions in the negotiations, you're leaving vulnerabilities. You're putting out puzzle pieces that, like you said in that summary, you don't always know what the puzzle piece is for, but you're getting a puzzle piece, and those pieces are only derived through those exchanges because Israel has no on-the-ground intelligence in Gaza. That is the one thing that this war has shown us over and over again. They have no idea where the captives are. They can operate inside Gaza for 630 plus days, coming up on 640 days, and not know anything about their captives. They can offer millions of dollars to the Palestinian population in Gaza to turn over any piece of information, and they get nothing. And that is a major success of the resistance that goes back to before this war. It goes back decades, in fact, and in a way, it's a product of Yahya Sinwar's leadership to break really the collaborators that were operating within the Palestinian political milieu and were as dangerous as any Israeli soldier. And it was necessary for the resistance to root them out, the collaborators out. And people may know, but Yahya Sinwar's first assignment as a political actor was in a counterintelligence unit that was charged with finding collaborators. And that trajectory of his career goes all the way through to the 2018 attempt by Israel to...
And that's what he was imprisoned for, right?
Yeah, well, they imprisoned him on multiple things because they didn't know who he was when he was first arrested. When they first arrested him in Jenin, they didn't know what they were arresting him for. And then once the Qassam Brigade's cells became known, they went back and retried him for those, for those killing of collaborators. In 2018, Israel had a clandestine operation to come into Gaza and plant tracking devices, listening devices on the closed network that the resistance uses, the telephone line that we just saw in their video the other day, that incredible operation in Khan Yunis. We saw the commander on the closed line. And that is the way that the resistance has been able to communicate throughout this entire war. And it hasn't been cracked by the Israelis. And that has allowed the resistance to fight in this way. Israel's blind in Gaza. And when you talk about how the Israelis hid their listening devices in the rubble, I mean, they're playing catch up on the resistance in this because the resistance has been rigging up the rubble, using the devastated terrain, as the Israelis call it, to their advantage, putting cameras in places that you wouldn't see it, camouflaging explosive devices in ways because of the total ruination of Gaza, allows them possibilities to plant their devices and conceal their devices. And so that's a very interesting report that they used the ceasefire and the prisoner exchange. And we can see the significance of that in the negotiations, because it's always in the negotiations that there'll be no overflight for 12 hours a day. You know, people might not pay much attention to that one out of the 50 clauses in the ceasefire, but those hours of the day are an attempt for the resistance to have a period of time where they can move people around, and they did it in those exchanges in January. They were remarkable. Like even Al Jazeera on the ground in Gaza, they were surprised where the trucks emerged from to hand over the Israeli captives at that time. So even right down to those details that are happening out in front of the whole world, this prisoner exchange happened in front of the whole world. And the reporters who lived there, who are well connected, they had no idea where, and they would say, oh, they just popped up out of nowhere. You'd see 10 trucks in a row out of nowhere. The Israelis have no idea. And so I think that's been a remarkable part of the story. You know, there's a lot of remarkable parts of the story, but the fact that the Israelis have no intelligence in Gaza, and the fact that after all of this time, no amount of bribes, no amount of money has contributed to the Israelis getting information about the captives in Gaza. That is something that the entire population of Gaza, you know, being driven out, chased around Gaza 20 times, moving, living in tents, excuse me, offering millions of dollars and safe haven, and they didn't get a single piece of evidence from a single person doing that. So the resistance is part of the Palestinian society. And I was listening to you guys before you came on, and it's true that the resistance can't, you know, they can't operate separate from the population. They feel a lot of pressure at the moment because of the pressure on the population, and they're starving as well. They're not living any differently than the Palestinians in the camps in Mawasi are living. And you can see that from their videos as well.
And John, what can you tell us about the operation yesterday that, according to Israeli media, killed 5 soldiers and wounded, I think, 14 or even more? We're curious about that operation, but also the context of where it took place. And this is where the general's plan was supposed to have completely depopulated the area. Why did the general's plan fail before we get to this?
It failed because of the Beit Hanoun battalion of the Qassam brigades. Really, honestly, that's the place where that plan went to die. And Beit Hanoun is on the it's near the border with Israel on the northeast of Gaza, and it is the area that was first invaded when the ground invasion began at the end of October 2023. It was into Beit Hanoun. Israel claimed in November of 2023 that they had operational control over Beit Hanoun. And they have gone back in 6-7 times, depending on how you quantify their operation, qualify their operation. They've gone in 8-10 times into Beit Hanoun, and they can't defeat the resistance in Beit Hanoun. This is a small town in the north of Gaza, and their fighters are able to 640 days into this continue to fight. And the Israelis have destroyed Beit Hanoun. There's really honestly nothing left of it. So they go in this operation that happened the other day. They bomb before they go in. They bomb mercilessly before they go in to lead their troops. And then they figure that they're safe, and their troops were walking, according to the Israeli investigation of the operation. Their troops were dismounted and were walking, and were hit by 2 IEDs that were at what Army radio said timed perfectly. So they're not just randomly triggered. They have fighters watching on camera for the moment that the Israelis hit the exact spot. and then they detonate the device at the precise moment. And then they followed it up by hitting the reinforcements that come in. It's a type of operation that we've seen all over Gaza, that the resistance is able to carry out based on the fact that they operate through tunnels, that their units are localized. So the Beit Hanoun battalion, when Israel's not in Beit Hanoun, the Beit Hanoun battalion does not run down to Jabalia, say, or to Gaza City and fight in Gaza City, and then the Gaza City fighters run up and fight in Beit Hanoun. They are in territorial brigades, and they stay in their positions. And so when the Israelis are not fighting in those positions, they're preparing for the next battle, which is something that we saw in Khan Yunis, particularly over the last 6 or 8 weeks, is that the Israelis hadn't been in Khan Yunis since last April. And they went back in 14 months later, and they're immediately hit by, I've got it upwards of 160 operations. That's not including artillery and standoff fire. That's a separate category. So these operations are from a unit that has been from a battalion. In Khan Yunis, it's a brigade, 6 battalions in Khan Yunis that have been preparing for the moment that the Israelis re-enter. And that's what happened in Beit Hanoun as well. And so when these soldiers come to the point where the resistance has prepared the ambush, they detonate the ambush. It's based on intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. It is not a hope and a prayer. These are very operational details, are very sharp and precise on these operations. They're being carried out by effective guerrilla forces that are organized like a standing army. When their fighters are assassinated, when their leadership is assassinated, they're able to replace that leadership in the same way that a structured military is able to replace their commanders. The Qassam brigades have lost a lot of their senior commanders. They fought most of this war without their top commanders, and they didn't admit the deaths of those commanders. You didn't see any fall off in the operations based on that. They're able to replace these leaders. Obviously, the leaders are super important. They hold tons of institutional knowledge, but they don't destroy the movement when these leaders are assassinated. And that's the case on the micro level in this war. But it's also the case over the trajectory of the entire Palestinian armed struggle. None of these assassinations end the armed struggle. If anything, they just motivate the next generation to fight like the commanders that they've lost fought.
John, I want to echo something Jeremy said, that your analysis has been so interesting over the course of this conflict, because there's so many people who are in the military or like OSINT, you can say, world, who focus on these conflicts. There's been very little focus on the Palestinian guerrilla warfare in Gaza, which has been sort of historical. We've never seen people underground tunnels and so forth fighting for 2 years. As you mentioned, starving with no ability to take leave, no allies, no ability to get replenished. Any professional military, the Israeli military included, will rotate soldiers in and out on very short monthly, deployments, because it's so stressful and intense in every way. Palestinian fighters and Hamas have been fighting, or the Al-Qassam brigade has been fighting for 2 years without any such ability to take any kind of downtime. I'm curious, you analyze these videos and you see these specific engagements. How are the Palestinians still fighting? How do they what weapons are they using? How do they replenish them and so forth? I know that to some extent they're actually building their own weapons from Israeli munitions. What do you see in these operations, and how are they able to continue operating at the level they do, given this intense pressure and sort of an endless war they're facing without ability to take a step back from it?
Well, it's a well-organized project that we're watching unfold before our eyes right now. This is a 20-plus year project to arm fighters, and to arm fighters with appropriate weaponry, weaponry that could be both built in the Gaza Strip, using the know-how in the Gaza Strip, making copies of already established weapons that are effective, as well as creating their own weapons. The Shawad EFP is an IED that we know from the Iraq era that vexed the Americans in Iraq. Qassam has built their own version that's a more devastating version of that. And that canister that we see being used, that's the same canister that we've seen since the first day of the war. So they have been prepared to fight for 640 plus days. And I think that's the thing that both the Israelis and the CNN talking heads and the OSINT people, they didn't expect that would be, they expected a breaking point for the resistance, but the resiliency in the resistance is in the project itself. It is to build those weapons. You know, there was a point after, say, the 2006 war with Hezbollah and Israel, where you could have looked and said the Kornet anti-tank guided missile system that devastated Israeli tanks, that's the weapon that is needed for Gaza, for urban warfare, for defeating Israeli tanks. But in Gaza, they didn't make that decision. They made a decision to make a tandem charged RPG that was light, easy to move, could be built in Gaza, could be the armament, the warhead itself can be built in Gaza. It doesn't require smuggling tunnels that come and go. And so they made a very crucial decision to go with these indigenously made weapons that they can make themselves, and they can arm them with the thousands of unexploded Israeli bombs that are dropped on the Gaza Strip for the past 20 years. You know, people measure the number of wars the age of their children by the number of wars. The kids talk about that all the time in Gaza. You know, I'm 4 wars old, I'm 5 wars old. All of those wars, the resistance has kept the munitions, and we've seen that in this war as well. We can see it from Saraya al-Quds, who don't have quite the same military manufacturing. We can see them use Israeli weapons directly. Qassam has a more layered approach where they harvest the explosives from the unexploded ordnance, and then they put that explosive material is then used in the anti-tank rockets that they use and the IEDs that they use, and they basically have enough of that to fight for a generation, because the Israelis have carried out, you know, they don't like to tell us the exact number, but, you know, recent numbers have it over 70,000 airstrikes. You've got a dud rate. They also don't tell us the dud rate, but it's known to be at least 5%. And some say it's significantly higher than that, especially with Israel dropping unguided and dated bombs from their collections, as well as their artillery shells. We know there's been a shortage of those, so they're using older stocks on those. The dud rate goes up on those, and the resistance has been able to build a manufacturing capacity to put the tools that are available to them, instead of reinventing the wheel, or instead of having a massive, a military based on massive weapons transfers. Like you said, they don't have a hinterland. They don't have a way of getting supplies from all over the world. The Sinai Desert is a very difficult place to operate in. And the Israelis have full control over all of the other borders and have for 20 years. So they made a strategic decision to have weapons that are built in Gaza arm the fighters who are from Gaza, and they made an indigenous, localized solution to a problem that they saw. And it wasn't an obvious one, because after the 2006 war, you would have thought that any military advisor would have said, you need Kornet anti-tank missiles. That's what you need for these heavy armored Israeli tanks, right? Israel has the most heavily armored tanks because they don't need to move those tanks to other countries like the Americans do. They don't need to put them on planes and boats, planes in particular, and drop them in another country. They just drive them over the fence, through the border, And so they can have very, very heavy, very armored tanks that they think were going to be able to stand up to this war. And right away, the first days of the war, we saw that wasn't true. Their brand new Namur troop carrier, which was supposed to be the solution to their troop carrier problem, which destroyed. They had a number of troop carriers destroyed in the 2014 war. That really shortened that war. Israel wasn't able to fight the war that they intended in 2014 because the resistance destroyed these carriers with the earlier versions of the Yasin tandem charge RPG. And so they built this Namur troop carrier that was supposed to be, the solution. It's a Merkava tank without the turret. And the first days of the war, they had mass casualty in the cabin of the Namur, where the shape charge from the tandem charge RPG, the Yasin, penetrates into the cabin of the personnel carrier, and the copper dart flies around inside the carrier, and it's a nightmare for the soldiers. And it's a very effective tool, and they have milled those tools in small locations so that each they're not dependent on a centralized location that could be bombed and destroy their entire weapons manufacturing industry. It's decentralized, and nobody knew going into this war that this would be possible for this long. There was questions, going back more than a year, of how many more are there of these? How deep are their stocks of these weapons?
John, if Israel had, in a world where Israel had never bombed Gaza after 2006, how much of a kind of weapon supply would Hamas have been able to produce? In other words, how much is smuggled and how much is pulled from unexploded ordnance?
We see smuggled artillery, for sure. We've seen smuggled weapon systems. There was a major smuggling possibility through the Sinai at particular times over the years.
Pre-2023.
Yes. In the early aughts, even talking about. In particular, where the weapons transfers were possible. The tunnels under Rafah in the south, they were so sophisticated at the time that people were bringing cattle through, and there's the stories of people bringing Kentucky Fried Chicken from Cairo and whatnot. That they were a fully functioning economy underneath Gaza to break the blockade. And so weapon systems were brought in at that time, and we have seen those systems, some systems that were presumably from Syria, some systems that were from the looted stocks of Muammar Gaddafi when his regime fell, that made their way to Gaza. The rocket program of the Qassam brigades that was built from 2001 on. A lot of that is built with locally derived, built explosives. But the dropping of the bombs in the major wars, the cast lead in 2008, 2009 in particular, and that is after Hamas is the government. And so there's they work in coordination with each other, because a family has an unexploded bomb in their living room. And so the Palestinians had ordnance disposal methods where they would come and take away, solve the problem for the civilians, and create a stockpile for the resistance.
I spoke with a former UN official once whose job it was after the 2014 war to go in and do unexploded ordnance removal. And he said at one point, actually, his after they had successfully gotten this bomb out of somebody's kitchen, they were then ambushed. They weren't attacked, but they were stopped. by he wasn't sure exactly who, somebody in resistance, which then just took the ordnance. So they actually had to do all the work, and then they were held up and had it.
Yeah, well, the UN sent in those people as well, and the Palestinians had their own people as well doing it.
Well, because he
super dangerous work.
He said they did something like 30 in like 6 months. Like it's such dangerous and slow work.
Yeah, and heavy, right? They're super heavy.
Yeah, and they're dropping 30 every minute.
Yeah,
so there's no way that any single entity can.
Yeah, and then they use the metal from the outside of the bomb is reused as well. I mean, we've seen clips from the resistance using old pipes from Israeli settlements. There was one footage of them diving down to a British warship that was sunk off the coast of Gaza and getting metals from there. So they use the entire bomb. They can harvest the explosive material out of it, and then with the 2,000-pound bombs, I mean, you need trucks for that to execute that task. So the harvesting can be separate from that, and that's probably what we're seeing right now. We're not totally sure how much is being put into use immediately, but that the assumption is that that's the vast majority of where they're getting their explosives, especially for these IEDs. You're just packing these canisters, or, we see Saraya al-Quds, Islamic Jihad. We see them put them into barrels, just dump the explosive material into barrels and bury the barrel and detonate the barrel itself. With Qassam, you see a weapons manufacturing capacity, an industry that builds these weapons and builds them effectively. We watch on camera the fighter deliver the device, pull the fuse. The fuse gives them 5 seconds before it detonates to save the fighter, so the fighter can pull it, be safe, get out of the way. And these are not blowing up in their face. These are properly engineered, tested. The R&D goes into these products. And Qassam said earlier in the war that from the beginning of the process, from R&D all the way through the Yasin tandem charge rocket, that it was a $500 a piece weapon that they're firing at Israeli tanks, $4 million Israeli tanks.
Maz may have one more question, but the last one for me is, given everything that you've said here, how is it that the IDF controls 80% of Gaza? If the guerrilla forces are this effective, what's going on?
Well, they don't. So they give these maps, and this is the other thing. The resistance doesn't fight anywhere near civilians. This is something that maybe isn't known to all people in the United States, but the Israelis give evacuation notices, ethnic cleansing notices. The civilians leave. Usually the Israelis massacre people before they leave to create the panic for them to leave. They move out of that area. Israel then calls that area. That's the 80% that you're citing is these free fire zones. But when they move into the built up areas, they're hit immediately. In Khan Yunis, their map in Khan Yunis, they don't control Khan Yunis in any meaningful way. And the map that they show, they just published one yesterday that shows it looks like the ink blots are starting to cover all of Khan Yunis. It's just not true. From that perspective, what they do control, and they're able to control because they're a massive army financed by the United States, is they're able to control the buffer zones, and they have successfully shrunk Gaza through the buffer zones. But control over places like Beit Hanoun, Beit Lahia, Jabalia Camp, Jabalia City, Gaza City, Shujaiya, they don't have. There's no meaningful use of the term control that the Israelis have in those areas. So they're trying to tell a story to their local audience that's saying that they're winning this war.
Yeah, and John, I do have one last question. Just tying it back to very recent events. Obviously, there was this ambush which took place the other day, which was very lethal, and I think 5 people were killed and 14 were injured. It seems that the Israeli military has been taking more casualties in the last month or so. I think there's been maybe well over 30 killed in action over the past month, which by the standards of this war for them is quite a bit. Has something changed either in their own force placement in Gaza or the way that the Qassam brigades or other groups are operating that's resulting in this increase in casualties that we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, they pushed into Khan Yunis for the first time in 14 months. The vast majority of the casualties are in Khan Yunis. The 6 battalions in the Khan Yunis brigade were ready for them and have fought them really hard. And that their plan for Khan Yunis was similar to the general's plan in the north that was foiled. Their plan for Khan Yunis was the Rafah plan. I was listening to you guys before I came on talking about the humanitarian cities. The extension of those humanitarian cities was supposed to be Khan Yunis. They were going to Rafah-ize Khan Yunis. They were going to destroy it all, wipe out Khan Yunis, make the Mawasi safe zone, funnel down through Khan Yunis into Rafah, into these cities. That was the plan. And the plan was supposed to take some weeks. And they're now more than some weeks into it, and they don't control any of the downtown core area of Khan Yunis. They're still fighting on the outer flanks, in the eastern flanks, in Abasan al-Kabira. They're still fighting there. That's 150 meters from the border. They're still fighting there and dying daily there. So that's where the casualties come from. They come from the push on Khan Yunis, and as well as the north. The north is still able to fight. Shujaiya is causing casualties. The Jabalia camp continues to cause casualties after 4 invasions of the Jabalia camp. And Beit Hanoun has just been a remarkable story of this war that I think history will mark this part of the war and the way that the Beit Hanoun battalion has been able to fight.
Last one from me. Do you have any ballpark sense of resistance losses throughout the war?
No,
that possible?
No, there hasn't been anything that I think that I would feel comfortable going with on that. I will say that we have never seen anything like the casualties the Israelis are saying, like not a fraction of it. We've never seen mass casualty resistance scenes. People all over Gaza have cameras. I think it's a fraction of what the Israelis say, but the war is costly. The war is costly on the Palestinians, no question. It's costly on the resistance. It's obviously devastatingly costly on the civilian population. It's costly on the Israelis. That we're going to see that in the years to come, how costly it is on the Israelis, and it's costly on their forces as well. But nothing, not even a fraction, I would say, of the Israeli toll. The Israelis try to give a number that makes it seem like half of the casualties are fighters, and it's just not true.
Implausible given the just what we've seen. Well, John Elmer from Electronic Intifada, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate this. And people find John on Twitter. Where else? Like where should they go to make sure they can follow everything that you're doing?
A Twitter account, John Elmer, just my name. I keep all the resistance. It's basically just a resistance archive, and my segments from the weekly show. Our show is Thursdays at noon Eastern. It's live every week, and we cut up the show like you guys do into segments, and people can watch those segments from there. And shout out to you guys too. Congratulations on the new project, and you're making waves already with it, so it's good to see.
Thanks, John. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Jeremy Maz, thank you also for joining me this morning. And on behalf of everybody at Dropsite News, thank you for watching. As always, go to dropsitenews.com to become either a free or a paying subscriber. We're a fiscally sponsored nonprofit, so contributions are tax deductible. You can find more about that at Ways to Give over at dropsitenews.com. We always keep our journalism free to the public. We're not putting it behind a paywall. We're able to do that because of people who contribute. And we thank those you who watched and those of you who were able to support. We'll see you next time.